We have How to Justify Empire with Esty Bagos.
Hello, everyone. Um, okay, so hi, I'm Esty Bagos, and today I'll be presenting part of my research on Philippine cultural diplomacy, titled Actively Remembering Tahanan, Speculating a Redesign of the 1904 World's Fair Philippine exhibit. You're probably wondering what tahanan means. In Filipino, tahanan means home. My home is the Philippines, an archipelago of over 7,100 islands located in Southeast Asia. Before leaving home for the US, I worked as a museum educator in Manila. This informed my interest in how historical narratives are crafted because I saw how disinformation and historical revisionism plagued my country. Museums helped shape these narratives. While museums remain responsible for objects, they're now more than ever responsible for the stories they tell, both the good and the bad. Museums all over the world are now confronting their colonial origins. Headlines in news outlets now read, Vatican agrees to return pieces of Parthenon to Greece, dozens of artifacts seized from the Met, Germany begins return of Benin bronzes to Nigeria. These headlines are part of a trend in which cultural institutions in the global West have started repatriation of cultural artifacts to their countries of origin, an act of restorative justice for wrongs committed by colonizers against colonized communities. As an act of digital repatriation, Mapping Philippine Material Culture was launched in 2021 as an ongoing global inventory of Philippine cultural artifacts, covering objects made in the Philippines and objects related to the Philippines. During the Project Zoom launch, it was revealed that 90% of Philippine cultural objects are located outside the country. Out of the 90%, only 5% have been publicly displayed. So, where did these objects go? Looking at the global inventory today, most of them seem to be in storage everywhere else, except in the Philippines. At the Geneva Ethnography Museum in Switzerland, 319 objects. Museum of World Cultures in Frankfurt, 526 objects. British Museum in London, 1,165 objects. Harvard Peabody Museum, 3,550 objects. The Peabody is one of several museums in the US with large collections of Philippine material culture. Most of these objects have found their way into the US through imperialist conquests. These were often donated or loaned for study in museums, brought to America out of an obligation felt by the colonizer to preserve the culture of the colonized. That being said, the United States has been presented as a custodian rather than aggressor and invader of the Philippine Islands. I grew up believing in this idea of America as a savior. Me being here stems from that belief. At home, I grew up speaking English. In school, I learned that the US saved the Philippines from Spanish and Japanese colonizers. And throughout the year, my family has kept pressuring me to stay in the US because there was a promise of a better life here. I believe that the US saved the Philippines because that's what I was taught. And through my research, I was surprised to find that US museums have supported this narrative. The lack of exhibitions with Philippine objects reinforced that. And that's when I realized museums can design historical narratives. In my research of Philippine artifacts across different US museums, I found that 3 museums in the East Coast, the Penn Museum in Philadelphia, Harvard's Peabody Museum in Cambridge, and the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History in DC, all point to a single place in history: the Philippine Exposition at the 1904 World's Fair. According to World's Fair historian Robert Rydell, these fairs were specifically publicized as the world's universities for the public to learn about the world's cultures. The 1904 fair celebrated the centennial of the Louisiana Purchase Agreement, an acquisition that doubled US territory. For my research, I spent spring break at St. Louis, Missouri, walking through Forest Park, which you can see here. Forest Park was the original site of the fair. I got a sense of scale and experienced what it was like for visitors to walk for hours through the 1,240-acre fairgrounds. In literary magazine Lapham's Quarterly, Harvard historian Walter Johnson has called the 1904 World's Fair the largest human zoo in history, citing how the 47-acre Philippine reservation was the 1904 fair's ideological core. Covering only 4% of the fairgrounds, the Philippine exhibit was mounted with an allocated budget of $1.5 million. Today, this amounts to about $33.9 million. To get to the Philippine exhibit, close to exhibitions on livestock, agriculture, forestry, and anthropology, visitors had to go through all the grand Beaux-Arts architecture, a variety of exhibitions, and even cross a bridge over the moat. Visitors saw what was deemed as progress before reaching the Philippine exhibit. Despite being located at one of the farthest points from the fair's entrance, the Philippine exhibit turned out to be one of the most popular attractions at the fair, with 99 out of every 100 visitors paying an extra fee to visit. And this made me wonder, how was Filipino identity represented in the 1904 World's Fair? We have to remember that the Philippine exhibit was post-war propaganda, created to present the latest addition to American territory 5 years after the end of the Spanish-American War. It served to justify the war and the American occupation of the Philippine Islands. In 1902, then Governor of the Philippines, William Howard Taft, issued a circular letter that instructed the design of the Philippine exhibit. For the anthropology section, it stated, "We wish to have tribal and racial exhibits in every detail, showing the state of culture and the growth of civilization." And so, over 1,000 Filipinos performed and literally lived at the fair, with different ethno-linguistic groups presented like a human zoo. This allowed visitors to see and understand people in racial terms, emphasizing the need for American governance to educate and civilize. It was evident in the display of the Igorotes, a term that flattens the identities of several tribes from the Philippines Cordillera region. They were presented in the fair as headhunters and dog eaters, with daily performances of dog stew preparation taken out of religious context. In contrast, there was also an exhibition of the Philippine Constabulary, 725 US-aligned Filipino soldiers performing military exercises. You especially see the contrast between the constabulary and the Igorotes in this pamphlet for the exhibition, showing the possibility of civilization in the Philippines under American rule. As I continued to unearth the details of the fair, I began to understand how it justified imperialism and saw how it made an impact in the decades that followed. I saw this through St. Louis-based Filipino-American visual artist Ria Unson. Ria migrated to the US in the mid-80s as a teenager. She's a descendant of Ramon Ochoa, one of the student guides at the 1904 Philippine exhibit. Referring to her past, she said, "I was so assimilated. I didn't have a voice in the world, let alone in my art. I couldn't find that thing to talk about because no one was talking about it. I realized then how certain narratives could potentially be omitted until they become forgotten." In attempting to trace the site of the Philippine exhibit, I learned that the area is now a mix of commercial establishments and an exclusive residential community. This is Concordia Park, part of the site of the Philippine exhibit. In Filipino, we have a saying, "Tahan na." It's a gentle way of consoling someone in tears to stop crying. It's fascinating to see it embedded in the word tahanan, home. Home is the place where one goes to stop crying. But what happens when traces of home can't be found? Tahan na were the same words I used to console myself when I realized that there were no markers of the Philippine exhibit in sight at Concordia Park. It was as if it never existed, as if we never existed. I felt erased. To quote Filipino visual artist Pio Abad, "How can we never forget unless we actively remember? How can a colonized country like the Philippines not be forgotten in history unless museums make an effort to actively remember?" And I thought speculating a redesign of the Philippine exhibit today with objects from the 1904 fair could present the possibility I imagined for the museum. That is, The museum is a site for active remembering. It can rekindle cultural memory to bring stories that have been buried in the past into the future. We shouldn't justify empire because that involves some form of denial. Instead, we should be accepting and confronting difficult historical truths. Confronting difficult historical realities is a form of active remembering. The Peabody Museum, for example, does this through the implementation of an ethical stewardship model, leading to the creation of policy and practice that actively confront the museum's problematic history. But because this takes time and manpower, digital restitution has also emerged as a form of reparation for injustice. Museums have shifted to producing digital material for global accessibility, from digitizing artifacts to developing online exhibitions. Designing these platforms for digital access can allow previously colonized countries like the Philippines to see what is out there so they can plan ahead and prepare for the eventual return of these objects. But is going digital enough? Shouldn't these objects be brought out to be seen, to be remembered by the community they belong to? More importantly, does digitizing an artifact justify the violence deemed necessary for its acquisition? Through my research journey, I understood that the personal is political. My way of seeking out justice is in unearthing the stories of my people. It is through active remembering, in crafting stories, and engaging with communities that long-forgotten memories can be restored. We don't have to let history happen passively. Instead, we can actively design history. And moving forward, my hope is to do exactly that. Whatever it is, whether it's publishing my work, curating exhibitions, creating a podcast, or even at this moment, standing on this stage today, I know that this is just the beginning, so let's actively design history together. Maraming salamat. Thank you.
Keep it going for Esty. Let's actively design history together. Wow, that was a really powerful presentation. Spring break in St. Louis. That is commitment. That is commitment. How was it?
I experienced getting locked down inside the library because there was a shooting nearby.
Okay, lockdown library shooting. Okay.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Okay. You're leaving us. What are you going to do in these 3 months? You put up a lot on the screen of stuff you have to do. Podcasts, publications, like museums and memorials. Like you've got a lot of work to do. What are you planning on doing?
All the things. So anyone who wants to collaborate, let's.
Esty needs collaborators. Is anyone here willing to collaborate? Okay, there we go. There we go. All it takes is one. Adobo chocolate chip cookies. You made those. We're gonna miss them. What? Oh, do you cook a lot?
No.
Okay, so just the cookies.
He's here, so they can attest to that.
Hello. Okay, but do you guys cook a lot? Okay, so you guys, yeah, and Esty does the eating of it. That's how it works in my family. So, well, Esty, that was really amazing. Thank you so much, and congratulations. Give it up one more time for Esty.